sick about the Anglo-Americano music. It was just not enough anymore for us. We had things to say in our own language.
It's one of those records. What the hell's this? It's great. Is it a joke?
It's everywhere. It's such an interesting art form.
I mean, I definitely heard the funk when I was playing it. I heard the groove, the beat, the syncopats, the way it was sounding, and so it definitely had the funk to it.
It's never too shiny. You still feel like you can get into it, and there's definitely a heart beating behind all those machines they've got.
Over the next hour, we're going to look at a Teutonic vision of the musical future and how Kraftwerk, krautrock, and the German electronic revolution of the 1960s and 70s changed pop music as we know it. From hip-hop to rock to pop. While Britain may have been in the middle of the swinging 60s and America was experiencing the hippie movement, the German musical youth of the late 1960s was expressing itself in a completely different way. Founding member of Kraftwerk, Ralf Hütter.
Germany has no center like maybe Paris, France or London. Germany is different republics put together, so there's cultural centers in Berlin, in our Düsseldorf, Rhine-Ruhr area, Cologne, in the Frankfurt area, Munich, and so there was a live culture in all these centers.
Michael Rutter is krautrock royalty. He played guitar in 3 of the most important German electronic groups, Harmonia, Neu, and Kraftwerk.
I'm not sure if in later years, I mean in every decade you have a situation like that. It's something that is quite unique. Of course, the great catastrophe of World War II and the society in Germany being completely shaken and also, of course, guilt-ridden. The young generation wanting to change that. It led to this desire of wanting to create my own identity in the music that was different, that was unique, and was my own.
Kraftwerk leader Ralf Hütter.
We started from zero because at first when we discovered that there is no contemporary German music of the so-called Bundesrepublik, and this cultural situation was in the late 60s identical in film, in literature, in all culture, in painting, in art forms. For us it was a very open space for music, and into this space we were lucky to develop our sounds.
Young Frenchman Jean-Hervé Perron, based in Germany, was also in the process of forming a group that would become Faust.
This is one thing that we all have in common here. We are feeding on music, on colors, on text, on paintings, on industrial sounds, on domestic sounds. We were all sick about the Anglo-Americano music. It was just not enough anymore for us. We had things to say in our own language, with our own harmonies. It was not enough. We had 68, we had big social and political upheavals. There was lots of revolution coming from France, and on a political level, also social, sexual, all this. And then that swept over everywhere. And in Germany, I think it was music that reacted the most.
The Zodiac Free Arts Lab in Berlin was one centre for this new form of psychedelia, an avant-garde form of experimental music embraced by local bands Cluster and Tangerine Dream. But there were similar experiments going on in Cologne with Can. with Amondul in Munich, and an early version of Kraftwerk called the Organisation in Düsseldorf, and Faust, who were based in a rural North German town near Hamburg, Jean Hervé Perron.
We were very, very, very involved, very busy. I say we, talking about all the musicians in Germany as generally. Maybe Faust was one of the most extreme. We were only concerned about what was happening in our head, within our group, within our cosmos, our art cosmos. And we were not aware that we were doing something new, something revolutionary. We were just playing music. There is one thing that has to be said. We were trying to find our own identity. So I cannot talk for the rest of the groups. I can only talk about us. We were not aware of what we were creating. No.
The bands knew little of what the others were doing, but the influential figure of Conny Plank, a Cologne-based producer and engineer, was one of a few involved in multiple projects. Michael Rütter again.
It's not giving him enough credit to say that he was very important. I think he was essential. Maybe we wouldn't have succeeded in recording the Neue albums, and maybe I wouldn't have been able to record my solo albums without Conny Plank. He was maybe one of two sound engineers in Germany who were at all interested in doing experimental stuff. His technical abilities and his abilities at grasping our ideas were amazing.
Still, 20 years after the Second World War finished, Germany was slowly adapting to a new era with new leaders. A disillusioned Michael Rütter skipped national service and took work in a psychiatric hospital, and it was here that his musical path began.
There was another guy working with me in the same hospital who also a guitar player who asked me, would you like to join me because I'm going to a recording session with a band here in Düsseldorf. The name is Kraftwerk, and I said, I don't know, I've never heard of them, sounds funny. But then I joined him and I ended up jamming with Ralf Hütter. We just jammed, we never talked, we didn't talk about the music we wanted to do. From that moment on, it just developed quite automatically because Florian Schneider was listening, and so that was the beginning of everything.
The music was often improvised in the studio, and live shows took an unorthodox path, embracing synthesizers, brass and string instruments, blending ambient melody and industrial noise, leading to some wild early shows. Jean Hervé Perron.
When the concert starts, there is obviously people on stage and people off stage, but after a short while, I mean, talking about the first maybe 5, 6, 10 rows, there is an absolute communion. So it's just a big band and a big group of some playing instrument and the other sending vibes, reacting, and the group transforming this vibe.
All across Germany, it seemed there were avant-garde angular groups of experimental musicians. But this new, often raucous sound was not complete, and mastering it would be a long process. Ralf Hütter.
First starting with my partner Florian in 68 and then until 74 Autobahn, where I think is the first kind of symphony that combines all these elements. We made some records before that, but finding different elements for the compositions of our music.
Michael Rütter.
My impression now is that the raw, brutal music we did live just couldn't be transferred into the situation of a recording studio, where you have this sterile atmosphere, no echo, no feedback from an audience. And my memory of some of the concerts we did as Kraftwerk were amazing. I mean, there was so much excitement, a very young audience also. There were very many 14, 16, 18-year-old people in the concerts.
At the beginning of the 70s, Can, Neu, Tangerine Dream, Kraftwerk, Faust and Popul Vuh were beginning to gain some attention outside of Deutschland. and the UK music press, desperate to cluster them together, couldn't resist giving the scene a name: krautrock. Originally a joke title, the name was given to all acts from Germany, whatever their sound.
I think there are so many differences between Armandül or Faust and even Can to the music of Neu and Kraftwerk and Cluster and Harmonia and my own music. The closer you get, that's always the case in every field of art. You know, if you know more about a subject, the closer you get, the more differences you recognize. And I can understand if you look at the whole music happening in the world from a long distance, then Can music and Kraftwerk and Neu music are very close together. But that's just the question of how close you get to the subject.
So just what does a krautrocker make of the name?
I love it. Well, it's a technical term, I think, these days. Of course, it's a stupid expression. It's silly. And it was derogative in the beginning, I guess, more or less. But I noticed that the term is around all over the world. And people use it to put music from Germany into one box. And I don't know, you can call it krautrock, you can call it, I don't know, cheesecake.
For Faust, it was an especially ridiculous term, given that the band had a Frenchman and an Austrian in the lineup, Jean-Hervé Perron.
We just have accepted that game, we are playing that game that we play in a group called Faust. So it's separate, two separate things. Faust, yes, is German. We cannot get rid of this. Faust is German, although there is not one single German person here in the room, not one.
It wasn't just the electronic music of Kraftwerk that was influencing the British pop scene. The experimentation of krautrock was an equal inspiration to bands like Depeche Mode, who blended simple synth melodies with industrial sounds. Joy Division and New Order drummer Stephen Morris fell for the music in the early days.
They were just different. It was in that most of them, in fact, 80% of them, it was all, and even the early Kraftwerk organisation thing was kind of a bit hippie, electronic, a bit trancey, spacey, floaty. But Kraftwerk were, different at their use of rhythm, really, and the kind of machine-like quality that the music had. Even though, obviously we like to think it was being made by machines, but I think there were more people than machines.
Before forming krautrock gods Neu, Michael Rütter was the guitarist in an early version of Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk already existed. They released the first album in late 70. And after we failed at the recordings for the second Kraftwerk album, it was clear, obvious that there were some other circumstances, atmospheric problems, but we just didn't want to continue in that lineup. And so Klaus Dinger and I decided to work on our own. And we started in autumn 1971 and recorded the first Neu album with Conny Plank.
Neu, again, have used rhythm in a similar sort of way to Kraftwerk, but it's a bit more organic.
By the early 70s, Kraftwerk and the other krautrock groups were gaining a bit of attention in the UK, particularly from DJ John Peel, who began championing the likes of Can and Faust and inviting them over for BBC Radio 1 sessions. And some of the world's biggest rock stars started to take notice. Michael Rütter was surprised by the attention.
Brian Eno suddenly sat in the first row of a Harmonia concert in 1971 when we played in Hamburg, and there were 3 people all dressed in black, sitting next to each other in the first row. And halfway through the concert, we stopped, and so we were introduced, and he joined us on stage for a jam later on, and we were just talking about music, and he told us about knowing all of our stuff, so we were surprised by that. He knew very well what we did, so he told us that he had been exchanging albums with David Bowie, discussing our music, our ideas, and I guess that was one of the reasons why he wanted to come and visit us and record with us. But it was an exchange of ideas. It wasn't just one way.
And looking for a change of sound and vision after the death of the glam Ziggy Stardust, David Bowie moved to Berlin.
So I ended up in Berlin. Was sort of coming back to Europe, wanted to reevaluate my musical language, and who better to work with, I thought, than Eno. And of course, I found what I consider a soulmate there.
I think the biggest influence was the work of Kraftwerk prior to Autobahn, and the new German sound was really appealing to me. Can, Edward Froese's band, Tangerine Dream. Not that band so much, but Edgar's stuff. Edgar's solo things were really, I thought, were very evocative. And there was this ambient thing that was happening, because Edgar had an album out called Something in Malaysian Pale, and it was, as far as I'm concerned, the first ambient music. It was just extraordinary album. Very quiet, you could only just hear it, you know. And I tried to apply some of the randomness on, again, because I associated with it immediately because of my interest in random sound and what you could do with just random sound. And I utilised a lot of that feeling for especially the title track, Station to Station.
Turn on the thin white tube, throwing darts in lovers' eyes.
The surprising thing is that we came up, we thought we were just going to be into a process of discovery and experiment and have some pretty wishy-washy stuff come out of it, but what did come out of it was a pretty good statement of some esoteric nature. Low and Heroes have been two of the fastest albums I've ever made, I think. More out of excitement and general enthusiasm than anything else.
Kraftwerk fan and dance music producer Alex Patterson.
For myself and for a lot of people around me that do music, we all have a love of German music, and it all kind of stems really from the love of the Low album and the Heroes album, and discovering things off that. I mean, all you have to do is listen to things like Harmonia or early Kraftwerk or even Neu to that point, and you'll hear the influences on the Low album.
By the mid-1970s, the leading krautrock groups began to play further afield and to bigger crowds, touring Europe, the US and the Far East. After running a Notting Hill record shop specialising in krautrock imports, Richard Branson was looking for bands to release on his new record label after the success of Virgin's first release, Mike Oldfield's progressive rock classic Tubular Bells in 1973. Tangerine Dream, Phaedra and Rubicon on Virgin were consecutive top 20 albums in the UK. Branson put out the Faust Tapes album for the price of a single, 49 pence, and made the Virtually Unknown Act another top 20 bestseller in the UK. And in 1974, Kraftwerk had a hit single. The song Autobahn, which occupied one entire side of the album of the same name, was cut from 23 minutes to 4, and hit the American Top 40 and peaked at number 11 in the UK charts. New Order's Stephen Morris.
The first time you actually realised that Kraftwerk could possibly be something special was Autobahn, really. Yeah, because it's one of those records. What the hell's this? It's great. Yeah. Is it a joke? I mean, I think Kraftwerk have got a great sense of humour. They must be very, very intelligent and quite witty, and that doesn't always come across, I mean, for me. But yeah, it was Autobahn. It was my first revelation.
It sounds like they're using the voice in German as an actual keyboard. Fun, fun, fun on the Autobahn. You know what that means? Board, board, board in German. Fun, fun, fun.
Fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn. Fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn.
It was the irony of driving in a car. Pure German humour.
Wir fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn. Fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn.
In 1975, Kraftwerk attracted attention in the UK from a prime-time TV performance.
Tomorrow's World. You know, so you should say, where were you when you first saw? Yeah, I saw Tomorrow's World at my mum's, and it was fantastic. And the guy who was playing, you could get a tie with a keyboard on. Brilliant.
Kraftwerk have a name for this. It's Maschinenmusik. The sounds are created at their laboratory in Düsseldorf, programmed, then recreated on stage with the minimum of fuss. This is Autobahn, based, say the group, on the rhythm of trucks, cars and passing bridges heard while driving through Germany. Next year, Kraftwerk hope to eliminate the keyboards altogether and build jackets with electronic lapels which can be played by touch.
Kraftwerk had become increasingly fascinated with the new synthesizer technology, and it had a growing influence on their sound. Ralf Hütter.
We've always talked about the endless quality of music within a sound landscape. So Autobahn basically for us, it goes on forever, only during the concert. Sometimes we play 7-8 minutes. We have played longer versions. These compositions that we made, they are fairly open. They're like scripts for acting, and there's a lot of room for improvisation, or we can change. I think electronic instruments are hypersensitive. They pick up frequencies from 20 to 20,000 hertz. So we even have our breath, or I put my heartbeat on electrocardiogram. And so we're working with all kinds of sound sources. Everything is possible. It's our everyday life. And the German word is Alltagsmusik. So we work with pocket calculators or anything that comes to our mind, with bicycles, cars droning along, radio activity, the sound waves of the radio, anything.
This approach to music was unique and for some, mind-blowing. Stephen Morris of New Order.
What's a day in the life of Kraftwerk like? You know, they don't tune up guitars. They don't have roadies running about. You know, trying to imagine how they managed to make the music that they made, and it's fascinating. And it's something, well, you know, we always used to do, and we still do it to this day. You know, let's write a number like Kraftwerk, because it's how do they do it? You know.
But after just a few years in the mid-70s, it was evident that most of the krautrock bands would do little more than keep carving their niche, albeit using the odd cement mixer or pneumatic drill as alternatives to guitars and drums. Kraftwerk, however, would now go on to a golden era in both innovation and commercial success. With an established lineup of band leaders Ralf Hütter and Florian Schneider on synthesizers and Wolfgang Fleur and Karl Bartos on electronic percussion, they crafted a clear, crisp, intricate sound. Pop star and synth fan, Little Boots.
I think the strength of Kraftwerk's music is, for me anyway, it's the melodies are just so beautiful and so simple. They're just like little bites of perfection all over it, and I always just feel like one tiny hook off one of their 10-minute tracks could be, you know, a massive pop song, just that one hook alone. You know, no one had really heard anything like it. Some of those sounds are just almost otherworldly and kind of weirdly robotic, but really human at the same time.
From the Autobahn to the train tracks, 1977's Trans-Europe Express was the first of 3 consecutive electronic pop masterpieces. I remember trying to tape Trans-Europe Express off the radio when John Peel first played it. Unfortunately, the song is so long, my C60 tape ran out before the end. It was followed by 2 more albums, each taking the technology further. First The Man Machine, and then Computer World. Stephen Morris.
Everything about Kraftwerk is kind of like, it's like designed. There's like nothing that's kind of left to chance. really. So the whole thing is really well thought out. And if you think about the records, every one of them was essentially some sort of concept album, and it is kind of that about you that mystifies you when you first hear them.
And with a progressive Düsseldorf sound came a deliberate robot-like image.
One of the covers I've got on my mantelpiece is, I think it's for the model, and they're all looking really saintly, and so I think they're painted. I don't think it's a photograph, but it almost looks like an airbrush photograph, and there's this kind of godly light coming from them all, but they don't quite look human, which is again this really fascinating kind of mixture of man and machine in there that they've always been so obsessed with, and that I think kind of comes out in everything they touch on, really.
Now, I remember Computer World coming out, and maybe the song that had the biggest effect on me was Pocket Calculator, as I was still at school and using a pocket calculator, but my pocket calculator unfortunately didn't make the noises that Kraftwerk's did.
I'm the operator with my